Ag the Agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome to John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School. And hi, welcome. You made it. You're over here in the Patreon world. Thank you very much. We're very, very grateful to all of you who decide to give something over to us. Like, we want to make sure we're engaging with the community here as much as possible, which is why we've recently sent out a message like, what is it that you have a question on? And we're going to do our best, Laura and myself, to pop in and pick out whatever things we can give a response to and do a little video for you there once a week. So we did get some great responses already, and the one I've chosen to pick out here is from Nicole, and I think it's best I'd probably read it out to you so you kind of get an understanding of where this is coming from, and then I will do my best to answer it from a couple of different perspectives, really. So Nicole was in contact with us. I've been struggling with a bit recently after struggling with my spirituality recently after fully embracing paganism. I found myself slightly angry with the pagan gods and with Christianity. So please forgive this question if this question has ignorance in it. But my question is, why did the gods allow a religion to spread that has caused so much blatant misery and death and irrational deeds in the name of the Christian God? Many cultures around the world worship the pantheon of gods from Ireland, India, Aztecs, etc. Powerful gods with beautiful, complex, and intricate stories. I understand that indigenous cultures around the world fought against colonialism and the spread of Christianity, but I can't help but feel like the gods abandoned their people, and we're living in a time described or prophesied by the Morrigan in the second poem of the Cosmogura. So thank you very much, Nicole, for again reaching out to us with the question. And I would first like to say that there isn't ignorance in the question. There's no apology needed there at all, because the beauty of questions is that it presents us with an opportunity to challenge our perspectives. I say this all the time, and it is such a valuable gift to kind of take that opportunity on board and to consider things from another angle or from another idea, or even things you take for granted or things that you believe you have already known. And if it's not kind of asked about, then there can be presumptions that people have certain levels of information that isn't talked about. And I've done a couple of videos over in YouTube about that, kind of addressing some of those basic fundamentals. So again, absolutely, there's no need to apologize for a question well considered and well asked. That's the whole purpose of all of this. You've kind of answered a part of the question yourself, and the answer is colonization. That aggressive colonization that has actually occurred in all of the countries you mentioned and many others. But I think we need to kind of go back a step to begin with, if that's okay, and talk about the original Ireland. Oh, well, first thing, I can only talk about from the Irish kind of perspective. I know some of the history of the world. I know some like that. It was the English, of course, who colonized Ireland through the Normans. It was the English who colonized India. It was the Spanish who colonized South America, as well as the French and the English who colonized North America. Like, there is all this information out there about the colonization. I think the Dutch as well were involved. Like, there's a lot of different kind of information and history, but really I got to stick within my own wheelhouse. So I'm not kind of speaking for anyone else's culture or speaking over anyone else's indigenous history or culture, which is why I won't be able to mention anything other than the Irish perspective. That makes sense. So, yeah, to kind of take it right the way back, the first kind of records that we have of Christianity arriving into Ireland was actually focusing on hermitages. So some of the earliest kind of examples that we have, like Gugambara and stuff, were literally just hermits, people who were following the Christian spirituality and came in to find these remote places in the landscape where they could practice and worship in peace, where they could explore their relationship and their spiritual connection with their deity and their understanding of deity in quiet solitude. And so there was then this intermingling, and this is one thing that we see time and again with Ireland, as even if we go back to the first mythological period in the Cosmogura, in the Laura Cabal era, in the Book of Taking of Ireland, Ireland seems to have this position of always embracing new cultures and blending new cultures or finding ways to kind of connect or interconnect them. So what happened with the original kind of arrivals of Christianity into Ireland was these spiritual people who just wanted to find a remote place and practice their spirituality in peace and in solitude. Their interactions and their connections with the indigenous people, the tribes, the Tuas of Ireland, led to a blend in spirituality and understanding of it, which was then later aggressively stamped upon by the Catholic kind of power structure, the Catholic Church, when they realized what form of Christianity was actually being practiced in Ireland. And so that's when things began to, again, fall into that colonization specifically, with missionary work and stuff into Ireland from popes. Again, St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland, was actually sent in as a propaganda piece and a missionary to convert the Irish to away from even like the Irish, the Christian practicing Irish already in Ireland, to convert them specifically into the Catholicism form. So the initial kind of arrival of these spiritual practices was not a problem. Absolutely not a problem. The problems always come, though, not when we're talking about gods, but when we're talking about men. And all of the misery, death, irrational deeds, all of the horror that was done by men on other men, done by humans to other humans. Now, where is the divine in that? Which is, in essence, the question. And the divine would always exist, but we have to also acknowledge that we are responsible for our own actions, and we have that, speaking from experience, the ability to be willfully disconnected from divinity, willfully disconnected from our spirituality, and to exist without exploring that or without kind of engaging in that growth. Which is why when we do have experiences of a spiritual nature, if we haven't had the language, if we haven't had the education, the learning, the structure in which to safely explore our spirituality, then we don't understand what it is, and we can't kind of rationalize it properly. And that's when we get that disconnect between the spiritual self and every emotional self, intellectual self, etc. So where were the Irish gods in all of this? What I have found myself through my explorations and then through my ongoing connection with the god I work for, which is the Dagda, is he never went anywhere. He absolutely never went anywhere. When we see specifically in the Irish context, at the end of the mythological cycle, we have the arrival of the sons of Mill, the Milesians. They come into Ireland as a conquesting army. They come out of Spain, having conquested up from the Mediterranean. And their interactions with the Tuatha Dé Danann, the incumbent kind of like tribe, leads to the power shift and the power exchange, where the Tuatha Dé Danann are kind of banished from our world and go into the Hollow Hills and become the Aeschi, or the people of the hills, or the people of the other crowd, the other world. But then the Milesians themselves, from which the Gael people are said to be descended, they had problems in Ireland. What was an abundant, amazing, fishful, beautiful kind of landscape became a wasteland, because essentially there was no harvests, there was no kind of like crops, there was no kind of milk from the cows, all because they were not living in right relationship with the spiritual connection of the land itself, or sovereignty. And so from there, they had to send their chief poet Amergin into the Hollow Hills, where they had banished the Tuatha Dé Danann, and renegotiate, in essence, an agreement for the people of our world to live in fair, balanced connection with the people of the other world. And it's through that kind of relationship that Ireland was then restored and all of its people could be descended. So this is our origin story. This is our origin myth, which then includes the interaction with the incumbent deity. So even though the Dagda, who was king in Ireland for 80 years, whose grandchildren were the kings in Ireland, the three kings in Ireland when the Milesians arrived, he's not gone. He doesn't disappear. The landscape of Ireland is still full of all of these all of these hollow hills, all of these kind of places where the other world can intersect with our world. And from my own experiences and conversing in my own practice of figuring things out with the Dagda, he never left, he never went anywhere. Which then brings up, why would he allow what happened? And the question is, how could he not? How could he kind of stop that when people were being actively turned away from him? And this is where we need to look at the structures and the culture and the practices of aggressive colonization. So what happened in Ireland was this ongoing process, this slow kind of disassembling of native power structures. So this was done through the later Middle Ages, after the Anglo-Norman invasion, where we had the decline of the Irish lords and Irish chieftains. It ended with the flight of the earls, which is believed to be the last the last kind of vestiges of Irish nobility fleeing out of Ireland because of, again, the ongoing oppression from Norman English, etc. So throughout that period, from then on, we had some very specific cultural shifts and changes forced upon the people of Ireland. For example, through the penal laws that were put in, where people could be sentenced to transportation if they were, not maintaining their right relationship with the new power structure, or if they were hosting bards or fellas, like, the ancient Irish storytellers, those who remembered the old days and the old gods. If they hosted them in their house, they could be sentenced to, punishments from the new incumbent power structure, which is this foreign power, this foreign colonization. So this then carries on through the medieval period, right up until the last couple of generations, even, if we're talking about Catholic colonization, because my father was in school with the Christian Brothers, who, this was the education system in Ireland. The Catholic Church swooped in and was like, yes, great. Well, there's no education in Ireland because, okay, if you want to go further back, I don't want to go into a full history lesson here, but the undermining power structure. And then when we finally manage to get independence from England, there was still this need, there's still this bond, and all of essentially the Catholic Church saw an opportunity to, well, we'll just provide all of the education. We'll just provide all of the education for all of the poor Irish children. And that was the only opportunity they had. Now, that then meant any schooling you were getting was Catholic schooling. They had positioned themselves in such a way that teaching was always going to be within their own sect of spirituality. And then you have a thing like a bota score or a tally stick, where if someone was using their left hand, like I'm left-handed, my dad was not allowed to use his left hand. He would be beaten if he used his left hand whilst writing in school. I'm 40 years old. My dad's only 60. Wait, 70? Another year or two, he's 70. But this is then real. Again, if you talk about the Irish language, anyone using the Irish language could be beaten by these Christian Brothers for the use of the native language. And also then you would run into difficulties in a home because the culture was such that opportunities in this post-industrial era were limited, and those would be even more limited if you couldn't speak English. And so, with the Irish people began to self-regulate or to self-dominate in order to make right for their children to be able to succeed in the world by making sure that they used English, because that was the world that was forced upon us. So again, where were the gods in all of this? They never left. They never went anywhere. But through the aggressive removal of our stories, the bards, the historians, those who could tell us the stories of the old days, through any kind of the records, all of the books that we have, the Book of the Dunkeld, Book of Fermoy, Book of Lismore, Book of Leinster, all that kind of stuff was documented by monks, Christian monks, and they did document the stories very faithfully. But there's always that addendum in there that, oh, well, this is just a fiction story, or, this part here where it's talking about a god that we know is talking about a god, they don't refer to it as a god, or they'll actually demean it and say, people thought it was a god, but it was actually a demon. And we actually have that in some examples in parentheses after the fact. They list out the full story as it was related to them, which was brilliant. But then, in the paragraphs are these things called marginalia, which is the words written in the little margin. That's where they put in the disparaging so that they can justify themselves in comparison to Christianity or Catholicism as it's being pushed upon them. So it really comes down to, how can someone understand a connection to a deity? How can someone understand a connection to a spiritual experience if they're not given the language to do so? If they're not given the education to do so? If all of your education is filtered into one specific kind of thing where you just say these words, you follow this dogma, and that's all you ever know about spirituality. You don't need to know anything about spirituality. In fact, all you need to know is that this guy in the black smock with the white thing on his neck, that's your link to spirituality. Whatever he says is God's word, and that's how it is. And that's part of the problem. So the culture itself is then twisted in such a way that there was no opportunity for the expression of spirituality of self and from self. And then when people did have those experiences, they didn't have the language structure, the education, the ability to rationalize those outside of the framework of Catholicism. That was the only thing that was available to them. But that was all done by people. That was all done by men on top of men, by humans on top of other humans. And so from my own experiences, as I began to develop my relationship with the Dagda, I ran into something similar to yourself. I was like very confused, like, well, where were you? And it's very healthy to be asking that question, to exploring this from your position, growing as a person who is pagan, who identifies as pagan and is choosing that track to follow their spiritual growth through. It's very healthy to have that question. And I did have the same question. And that's the response I got. I never left. And then I was confronted with the sadness of the Dagda, because he is very much an Irish deity. He is in the very bones of Ireland, in the hills, in the landscape of Ireland. And he never left. He couldn't leave. There was no place for him to go, because this is where he is connected. This is home. And then to have generations of Irish people not knowing his name, not being able to kind of rely on his strength, not being able to turn to the Morrigan for guidance of prophecy or hope of change. Very upsetting. And the feelings that you're feeling, you got to feel your feelings. Those aren't my rules. Those are Dagda rules. Well, that's my understanding of Dagda rules as I present them. But it's okay to be angry, but it's important that we assess our anger, that we kind of rationalize it through it, that we take the time to kind of see, well, what am I actually angry at? Am I angry from a place of love, or am I angry from a place of fear? What are the influences that is actually causing this reaction in me? And I became equally angry at the Catholic Church. But then I had to take that anger and check it very carefully, because I was raised in Catholic spirituality. There's parts of the Catholic practices that I absolutely love. The fundamental baseline of, what, everyone's inherently good and everyone should just love everyone. What's wrong with that? So I adjusted my expression. Catholicism as a spiritual practice is a beautiful thing. It's as valid as any expression of paganism as a spiritual practice. The problem, though, is not the spiritual practice or the religion. It's the power structure, the corrupt organization, as Laura puts it, which feeds upon or forces the structure in, which is the Catholic Church. That power structure which has caused all of that blatant misery and death, and has caused the hiding and the shifting of their own, because canon law supersedes national law. Oh, yes, there's a problem with this priest causing harm in this particular area. Well, let's just take him out of that area and put him over there instead. That solves the problem. No, it doesn't. You've just moved the problem to another place. But it's grand. He confessed his sins and he was forgiven by God's representative, i.e. the guy with the little white collar, and he's never going to do it again. I still have similar levels of impassioned anger when it comes to that hurt that was caused by that power structure of humans on other humans. But I think it's important to sit with the emotion, to process the emotion where we are, and then to decide, do we need to let go of that energy so that we can heal and move past that point? Or do we need to take that energy and direct it in the right place? I don't direct my anger at Catholicism. I still think that many churches in Ireland are beautiful places, many kind of sacred holy wells, which, okay, most of them have been co-opted from early pagan places, but I'm not going to spit on a Mary statue. I might give 2 fingers to a Patrick statue, because fuck that guy, but the beautiful expression of spirituality as it exists in any nation or as it exists in any kind of culture is something that deserves respect. What I won't respect, though, is the power structures of men on top of those which cause the harm, which cause the corruption, which cause the difficulty. And that's where I will direct my anger. So I think it's important to understand that can the Indigenous peoples be held accountable for doing their best to survive in a world where the deck was stacked against them, actively stacked against them? No, I wouldn't be angry at those people. I would be sad for those people. I am still very sad for those people. I'm very sad that we do not still have a living bardic tradition, that we do not have the expression of poetry and story in our country that we used to have. I do everything I can within my limited capacity to be that, or to promote that, or to talk about that every single day as much as I can. But do I look back on my ancestors and say, well, Dad, you should have fought harder to hold on to your native language when you were being beaten as a child? No. What I need to do is accept the fact that the power structure that was forced upon my country was such that my people were put in a position of survival, where having anything other than your main meals a day was a privilege. Talking about the plantations, talking about the 1850s, like talking about like the Gortimore, the Great Famine, like all of these kind of things. When a society and a culture is aggressively forced into the bare minimum formats of survival, it's very hard to have any energy to focus on any others, to hold on to your culture, to hold on to your language, because all the energy goes into surviving as a people. Now, if that was, again, the intention that was placed upon us by the colonizers, I would be hesitant to say, yes, 100% that was what was done to us with intent. It might have been done by, poor intent or malintent. But that's what happened. And that's where we are. That's why now there are very limited spaces in Ireland. They're known as Gaeltacht, as in a place where Irish is spoken. And they're like townships, not even townships, they're like villages, where everyone in the village speaks Oscuelga, speaks in Irish. The majority of the country doesn't. In the past, hands up here, I had difficulties learning Irish. I wasn't educated well in it, and I didn't connect with it very well when I was in school. And I had said that Irish was a dead language, because looking around, it didn't exist for me. It didn't exist anywhere for me. I now know the shame for having said that, but also the sadness for the fact that the very language of my country, the very ancient language, which is so beautiful and so poetic and so expressive in so many ways, doesn't exist anymore in so many places, apart from these small little holdouts. It's a thing of sadness and a thing of pity. So I think it's a matter of assessing where the emotion is coming from. Again, I bumped off it. I ran into it myself. You're not alone in your experience. And for anyone who's having similar experiences or similar emotions, or kind of trying to process it through, again, you're not alone. It's healthy to be having those expressions. It's more healthy to follow those questions and try and find an answer. If this is given some answer, I'm delighted. If not, keep following the question. Keep finding your answers. Keep looking for them out there. Because I found mine through my connection with Dagda, and I wrote a story about it a long time ago where he had even forgotten his name because no one said it out loud for generations, which was very, very sad for me. But then, which is why my vocation is to say the Dagda's name on Dagda out loud every single day, because he won't forget his name if I'm saying it out loud every day. And other people will never forget his name if I'm saying it out loud every day. So I don't know if that answers the question for you. I hope it's given some perspective, which is, again, the gift you gave me at the start, an opportunity for perspective to kind of take it through and to consider it. But if it has answered, I'm delighted. But hopefully I've also given you some more questions to kind of follow through yourself. Where is the emotion coming from? How can you take that emotion and direct it? What do you need to direct that energy at? Either outside, at a structure, at something, or within your own communication, to try and find out where is the gap, what is kind of causing this frustration or irritation or anger. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with anger, as long as directed in the right way, as long as it's directed towards a healthy kind of purpose. And if that is a case of building the relationship with your pagan deities, to the point where you're able to say, listen, I'm actually hands on the table, I'm angry with you, I don't understand, why is this here? And then being open to whatever they have to share back. That is a healthy pursuit as far as paganism goes. But it's important to be able to rationalize where your experiences differ from their experiences and how those kind of bridge together, so that we don't presume upon. This is one thing, this is me talking about myself. I often presume, am I putting my own sadness on the Dagda when I talk about the loss of spirituality of the Irish people? It's taken me a while to kind of come around and to check that and to reassess myself. I don't believe in any way that I'm forcing my sadness on him. I have experienced a very scary, large amount of sadness, which could never exist within inside me, as far as I'm concerned, and that must be coming from him. But again, I'm open to the possibility that I'm wrong, and I'm open to keeping my connection up with him, working within the right relationships, that core quiveness that we always talk about here at the Irish Pagan School with the deity, so that we can have that better understanding over time. So this has been a great question. Thank you very much for asking it. I'm really, really grateful for you dropping by, and I do hope this has provided some answer. So for all of you here in our Patreon, thank you very much, Gurav Mila Mahagat, for being with us and for supporting us. And yeah, we're looking forward to doing more of this here on the regular. Until next time, look after yourself, take care of yourself, and slán.